hello everyone. I feel like I'm giving a sermon with this microphone. So it's after lunch, so I figured what's the most boring title I could come up with? Electromagnetism and human health. I could have called it why 5G is, activating vaccinations and frying everyone's brains, but we'll save that for next time. But seriously, it's a pleasure. Max, Simon, thanks so much for having me. I mean, anyone who gives me the floor to talk about EMFs for an hour, I'm going to fly across the world to come here. So being the only non-Aussie feels special. I'd rather be here. This is Wyoming, a picture of my buddy who I go hunting with. You've all heard of Wyoming a few times now, I think, throughout the day. So it's a place maybe most Aussies not familiar with, but it's the least populated state in the United States. It's a ton of nature, very low EMF. Big fan. All right, so who am I? Scotty gave me an amazing introduction there. So by degree, an electrical engineer, but kind of went right into the business side of engineering and the electronics semiconductor industry. So, and it's really funny because I realized in school I wasn't that passionate about electrical engineering or electromagnetism, which is what I'm here to talk about. It was only recently when I really dove into my own health journey, healing journey, after suffering one too many concussions about 6 years ago, mostly from soccer that I played in university, and started to realize that electromagnetism, electricity is actually really important when it comes to our health, when it comes to our biology. And I was realizing this simultaneously while I was reconnecting to nature. And anecdotally, I felt the more time I spent outdoors, the more time and, just connection I had to nature, the better I felt. I completely healed myself after having post-concussive syndrome for like 15 months, daily headaches, sensitivity to noise, light, sound, like all the classic concussion-like symptoms. And neurologists told me, just take it easy, man. You'll get back to your normal routine. And that didn't do anything for me. It wasn't until I overhauled my lifestyle habit and kind of doing a lot of the things here that everyone's talked about the past 2 days. And really, the past couple of years, I realized I had this background, this insight as an electrical engineer to kind of bridge the gap in terms of knowledge that people have, because this is a complex topic, right? Even light, anything EMF related, it's complicated. Like, we don't learn basic physics. We don't apply this to health topics. Most engineers don't know anything about biology, and most people who know about biology and doctors and practitioners know absolutely nothing about electromagnetism and electrical engineering principles. So I don't claim to be an expert in either field. I know 99% more about biology than electrical engineer, or know more about biology than 99% of electrical engineers, and I know more about electrical engineering and electromagnetism than 99% of doctors. So that's where we're at. It's kind of a fun path to pioneer, and everyone's who's talked here today and yesterday, especially today on the health side, we are really at the frontier of this. And I can tell you the past 12 months, I've talked to a lot of people, some of them very big names, like in the health space, millions of followers. And they ask me questions about EMFs and, seasonal eating and things that are more esoteric, but have a lot of science behind them. So it's just been a pleasure. The fact that I get to do this now for my work at Daylight Computer, which I'm going to talk more about, is just a dream come true. And yeah, we're just paving the path forward for what it really means to understand how our biology functions and how we can improve our environment. So really exciting. And then, I wrote a book 3 years ago, it seems like a lifetime ago, called Bitcoin and Beef. So really big on decentralization. We'll tie that into the picture here. Big on Bitcoin and individual sovereignty. And that kind of was my foray into putting myself out there on social media and connecting with like-minded individuals. And this is a picture of me hiking with my nephew back when he was a lot lighter, carrying up a mountain. It's a lot of fun. So that's what we like to do in Wyoming. So here it is. Here's my statement that I've said many times. Most of the time, people don't listen to me, or they listen and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, my roommates and people, parents. I really think EMFs are the most pervasive environmental toxin in our society today. And I'll talk about exactly what that covers. It basically means that modern technology is the biggest toxin in our lives. And It's an unfortunate circumstance because that's what we're glued to, that's what we use for our work, and it's ubiquitous, it's pervasive, it's unavoidable, but it's toxic. So I'm going to talk about first why that's the case by setting the scene, having you understand the electromagnetic aspects of our world, of our biology, and then getting into the difference between native and non-native EMFs. But it includes everything on the electromagnetic spectra. So radio frequencies, 4G signal, 5G, the Wi-Fi in your house, power frequencies from the electrical power grid, which is 50 hertz down here, it's 60 hertz in the US. And then also artificial light that we can see. I don't need to touch a ton on it because Max, Cameron, and Kira as well touched on the light aspect, but light, visible light, is also part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So artificial blue light from screens, from lighting, is also a non-native EMF. And if you take all of this, I really think this is affecting our health at the greatest level because it's so ubiquitous. We eat 3 times a day, maybe some of you 1 or 2. We drink water maybe 5, 6, 7 times a day, 10 if you're really dehydrated because you're in a Wi-Fi room on your phone all the time. But we consume electromagnetic inputs 24/7, 365 days a year. Every second of the day, you're taking input signals from your environment of the electromagnetic type. And that's why I think it's so important for us to understand that. So in order to understand it, we need to go through some basic overview of what even is electromagnetism. And it can get complex. There will be a quiz afterwards, so write everything down that I say. But we can kind of get started and then make some relationships to what you actually understand. But at the high level, what they teach you in electrical engineering and physics is that electromagnetism was a unified theory that James Clerk Maxwell kind of came up with in the late 1800s. It's this revolutionary time for physics, Newtonian physics, and then kind of the early days of quantum physics. He basically came up with these set of equations that helped everyone understand, the connection between magnetism, light, and electric fields and the electrical nature of the planet, of the world, the universe that we live in. And this is what I was taught in electrical engineering. So don't think that a lot of this stuff I'm talking about, I already knew when I graduated. And also don't forget that I had basically brain damage my last year of college, so I forgot everything. But yeah, this is what electromagnetism is to most engineers, physicists, people. But in reality, it's magic. But in reality, it's light. So it's light that we can see, as everyone, Cameron, Max, Kira have talked about, but it's also light that we can't see. And what's important to grasp here, again, is this is just around us all of the time, and we're always taking it as an input signal. But really, electromagnetism is light. It's photons that are oscillating at a certain frequency, and they have a wavelength associated with them, and they have energy associated with them. And the important thing to consider here is that what an electromagnetic field is, what an electromagnetic wave is. These are all like words that people throw around, and I just want everyone to understand the basics, that this is all light, and light is a wave, but it's also a particle. So this is this dual wave particle theory that's been proven. It's a quantum kind of aspect of light. It's very important, but to keep it simple, this is an electromagnetic wave, and it has a magnetic field component to it and an electric field component. So sometimes you'll hear people talking about magnetism, sometimes you hear people talking about electric fields. I'm going to talk about both of those things, but they're directly related, and depending on the frequency, sometimes they're separated in terms of measurement and discussion, if you're measuring EMFs with a meter, and then sometimes they're combined into one wave. But they're always connected. They're actually oscillating in phase 90 degrees apart from each other, and that's really important to grasp. But more importantly is what is generating electromagnetic fields. The main source, of course, is coming from the sun, but from a non-native aspect, what's important to get is that electric fields are generated by charged objects or voltage. So this might be a term that people are familiar with, the voltage in your plug in your house. So when you're turning a lamp on, you need voltage to power that lamp. So when you plug it in, there is then a voltage potential being propagated from the power that's in your house, it's coming from the transmission lines to the lamp. And when it is powered on, but it's not switched on, so you didn't flick the light on, it just has an electric field component to it. However, magnetic fields are generated by moving charges or current. So when you actually turn that lamp on, the light is on, then you have both an electric field and a magnetic field. So that's an important distinction, and you can get into the deeper physics that like changing magnetic fields induce an electric field and vice versa through Faraday's laws, but that's not really that important. However, when we talk about mitigation tactics, this is all helpful to know, because even if something's plugged in, but it's turned off, especially if it's ungrounded, two-prong plug, you're getting electric field propagating outwards in your house. So don't leave things plugged in for no reason. And then what's also important, we saw a lot of light spectras up here earlier that had nanometers, which is measuring wavelength of the light. Wavelength is measuring the tip-to-tip length of one wave cycle. And then the frequency is inversely proportional to that. That's measured in hertz, which is typically what you'll hear when you're talking about Wi-Fi or cell signal or power. The energy of the wave is proportional directly to the frequency. So as we go up in frequency, we go higher in energy, and we go lower in wavelength. We get smaller wavelengths. So this is a really important picture. This is the electromagnetic spectra. This is everything, right? So everyone earlier mostly talked about visible light or slightly above that with ultraviolet radiation and infrared radiation. I'm here to talk about everything else. And it could be as low as 0.01% that the visible spectra makes up of this. So it's like a tiny, tiny amount. And that's what everyone's focused on, because that's what we can see. So the reason why this is such an inconvenient situation and people can't conceive it is because they can't see it, right? It's hard for us to conceptualize things being bad for us that we can't see. But if you could see all of the electromagnetic waves bouncing around this room, and I'll turn my EMF meter on at some point, and you'll be very annoyed when I turn the sound on because it'll just go nuts. But this is really what we're dealing with on a daily basis. So in the low frequency realm, we have our power at 50, 60 hertz, and then throughout the years, radio frequencies have kind of taken up a good portion of the rest of the spectra. So radios, TV broadcasts, and then now at phones, we're operating in the hundreds of megahertz to low gigahertz range. And the difference between your power outlet, 50 hertz, and Wi-Fi is drastic. It's 50 wave cycles per second, and then Wi-Fi is 2.4 billion. And it's also that difference in the energy of that wave. So if someone's selling you a sticker saying that this will solve all your EMF problems, ask them how that's possible that it's addressing such a vast difference in electromagnetic waves. And they won't have an answer for you because they don't understand basic physics. And the other thing that's really important to know, especially for combating naysayers, people who don't really understand biology, is the component of non-ionizing radiation and ionizing radiation. So most people are taught in school, ionizing radiation is bad, it's harmful. That's like, the end of ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays. That's why we have to worry about, going to the dentist, getting too many, having too many transcontinental flights, because it's ionizing radiation. The waves have so much energy that they'll actually break the bonds in the molecules in your body. It'll knock an electron completely out of its orbit, whereas the rest of the spectra just doesn't have that much energy. So how could it have a biological effect if it doesn't have enough energy to be ionizing? Well, we're going to get into why that is exactly. But shorter wavelengths equal higher frequency equals higher energy. Longer wavelengths equals lower frequency and lower energy. So here's two examples. Blue light is 450 nanometers, 670 trillion hertz, so 670 terahertz, and then it has an energy of 3.1 electron volts, which probably means nothing to you. But Bluetooth, which is completely different, is 2.4 gigahertz, 12.5 centimeter wavelength, so vast difference. And then the energy is 9.9 times 10 to the negative 6 electron volts. So vast difference in magnitude in the energy, both affects our biology. So that's kind of what we'll get into. And here's another thing. I just want to harp on this, right? Like everything is electromagnetic, pretty much. Not everything, but it's really a major component because the source of life on this planet is coming from the sun. We have a magnetic field, a natural magnetic field that we'll get into on the Earth. And it's really the core principle of biology is electromagnetism. Yet they don't really teach any of this in academia. They probably gloss over it. I mean, you learn about the basics in physics and chemistry, but it's not educated about how vastly important this is to our biology. And it's funny because, we're out here with our tinfoil hats, literally protecting against EMFs, and we're the crazy ones. And this is really a subject where woo-woo and esoteric thinking meets science, and you have to bridge the gap. So it's a struggle. But now I want to get into the difference between native EMFs and non-native EMFs. So here's a good depiction, right? Like we talk a lot about meat, yesterday a lot about farming. So I see native EMFs as a Jake Wolke ribeye. It's legit, it's proof of work. It's good stuff, good marbling. And then non-native EMFs is like, the beyond meat of food. It's fake, it's soy. And if you consume a lot of it, you're gonna look like, people who consume Beyond sausages, if people actually buy that stuff. And if you eat Jake Wolke steaks more than you eat Beyond sausages, you're probably gonna look pretty damn good. So what are some native electromagnetic fields on this planet? So the one that might be the most important, the one that actually is the reason why we're even able to exist as a species, and there's a big difference between us and Mars, which are both in this Goldilocks zone in our solar system, is our natural magnetic field. So the magnetic field is generated because the Earth has this molten iron core. And iron is a charged particle. It has movement because it's lava. It's moving around. And remember what I said earlier is that we have charged particles moving, then we have a magnetic field. So that's what's generating this Earth's magnetic field. And then that magnetic field is interacting with the sun, the solar storms, the solar flares, and everything that is just assaulting our planet constantly. And it's what's protecting us. It's what's filtering out the really ionizing high-energy electromagnetic waves from getting to the surface of the Earth, and it's protecting us, as you can see in these graphics. And it's really cool because without it, we wouldn't exist. And that's not the end of the magnetic field of the Earth being very important, but the strength or the oscillation, it varies from being static, which means it has no frequency associated to it, to peaking around 10 cycles a second or 10 hertz to dropping off around 30 hertz. So low frequency. So in that realm, a little bit lower to where our power is. And that's going to be important later on. And then we have other electromagnetic activity going on. We have what's called the Schumann's resonance, which I think probably some of you have heard of. So the Schumann's resonance is a phenomena where we have the natural magnetic field, and then we have a lot of lightning strikes as well going on. And the map on the right here is a map of lightning strikes and thunderstorm activity in the world. And those lightning strikes are generating a substantial amount of electrical potential, and it's interacting with the already ongoing charged particles in our atmosphere, and is creating a resonance frequency that's known as the Schumann's resonance. And this has a first harmonic at 7.83 hertz, second at 14, third at 20, which goes down in strength as you get to higher harmonics. What's cool as well to note is that the incidence of thunderstorms is very concentrated around equatorial regions. So I think there's 70% of all thunderstorms within plus or minus 30 degrees north, 30 degrees south latitude. So you get a lot stronger electrical field activity at equatorial regions. And then going back to the magnetic field, we have this molten iron core generating a dipole. So the Earth is literally a giant bar magnet underneath, and it's very close to our geographical poles, the north and the south, but you'll also get stronger magnetic field activity towards the poles. So it's tying into this theme that your local environment matters tremendously. So when I take a flight from the US to Australia, as I did, I'm in a completely new environment. I'm in a completely new electromagnetic environment, and my body is picking up input signals constantly to adapt and, fine-tune my biological processes to thrive there. So electrical field activity is higher towards the, equatorial regions, as mentioned, and that's going to be important for things such as grounding, which I'll talk about in a bit. But this is a cool graph on the left because it shows the natural EMFs, right? So it's this tiny little amount in the low frequency range. Lightning strikes can oscillate in the thousands of hertz, and then visible light is in the trillions of hertz or cycles per second. So remember that picture because we'll come back to it. But it's cool. And this graphic on the right comes from Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning quantum physicist who wrote about this in the 60s and lectured on it, I think, maybe 70s. So this was known, and this was taught to the world's top students. But where did it go? Why did we lose all of this education around the electromagnetic aspects of our environment? And we'll touch on that a little bit. And the rest is the solar spectrum. So I think this has been shown at least 4 times today. So we get that from ultraviolet to visible to infrared. We have solar radiation reaching the Earth. And then we also, like I mentioned, have this atmospheric window. We have an atmosphere that's protecting us, a magnetic sphere, magnetosphere, that's protecting us from other solar radiation reaching the Earth. And this kind of depicts what is actually making it to the Earth. And it's fascinating because there is actually a radio window of radio frequencies from outer space making it to the Earth. However, if you put one cell phone on the moon, according to this one researcher, it would outweigh all of the natural radio frequencies that is making it to the surface of our planet. So that's kind of prefacing the amount of unnatural frequencies, especially in the radio realm and range that we are being exposed to. So here are non-native electromagnetic field sources. And I'll probably rant for quite a bit because I don't have too many slides on this, but I could probably talk about 5G for like an hour. I think I have on Max's podcast. And I could talk about AirPods and Bluetooth and high voltage transmission lines. These are all really unnatural sources, and they're all different frequencies, or they vary. So in the top, we have the electrical power system, right? 50, 60 hertz, 50 hertz down here. And again, it was outlined already today. When did that occur? Why did that happen? And what was the reason for that? And did we see change in our health as a society? And in the late 1800s, Tesla and Edison actually had a battle, right? The DC versus AC power grid battle. It's a really cool one to look up because Tesla was a fan of alternating current and Edison was a fan of direct current. And if we had gone with direct current for our power grids, the world may have looked a lot different. But there was issues with high voltage transmission, so Tesla won and Westinghouse bought them out and they electrified the world, mostly to power lights. So artificial lights wouldn't have transpired as a ubiquitous issue if we didn't have the electrical grid. And then all of a sudden, every city in the world by like 1940 had electrical power. So an AC field alternating that we never had before in human history. And there was already an incidence of chronic disease starting to proliferate. And a good book to read on that is called The Invisible Rainbow. Again, this is all like very correlated data. So we can never, and it's a problem with EMFs in general, is you can never isolate a lot of these variables because we change a lot of things. Throughout the 20th century, we have all these non-native electromagnetic inputs. We started eating like garbage. We started moving more inside. It was all coinciding at the same time. And you'll see it's really a toxic threshold. And I'm here to talk about EMFs. I wrote a book half about the food system. It's everything. We have this toxic threshold, and it's only been ever increasing throughout the 20th century into today. So let's go to the cell phone tower. So 5G is really popular, right? Everyone always wants to know about 5G. Well, let me tell you that 3G, 4G are just as bad, and they've been around for a long time since since we've had cell phones, since we've had cell service. The difference is they're now moving to higher frequencies. And that's a problem because it's higher energy wavelengths, and there's actually no studies really done on 5G directly. So again, we get into this tricky situation of, show me the studies, and there are none because no one's researching it, because there's no incentive for it. A researcher that's going to test if 5G radiation is maybe like damaging for, cognitive health or mitochondrial function, they are not going to have anyone to fund that study. And if they have a negative outcome, it's going to blacklist them from their peers in academia. So there's literally no motivation to uncover the truth around these topics because it's so inconvenient, because we use this technology, and I'll get a bit more into that. But 5G is a problem. However, the higher frequency bands, 5G has 3 bands, the low band, mid band, and high band. The high band is the millimeter waves, which was what everyone was freaking out about in 2020 and 2021, especially during COVID, especially when they were saying it was causing COVID, which it doesn't even really matter. It's all toxic. And if you have a toxic threshold, if you got vaccinated, you live in a giant city with 5G towers next to your head, it's probably not good, right? So that's the only place where the high frequency 5G is actually rolled out, is in cities. Because the good thing about 5G is the range on those waves is horrible. It's like 100 meters and then it drops out. That's why they installed all these repeater towers everywhere, so that they could get the signals across. And if you live not in a downtown area, you're much less likely to be attracted to a 5G signal. However, density of living matters the most. And the more people you're around, the more devices are around, the more cell tower signals that are pinging, and the more exposure you have. And Wi-Fi and AirPods that I have on the right actually use the same exact frequency, 2.4 gigahertz, which happens to also be the same exact frequency that a microwave uses to heat up your food. So if it's dehydrating your food, it's very low power compared to a microwave. Imagine what it might be doing to the cells in your body. And then here we have some cool ones that are also unsuspecting. So we have the blue lit screens, which is obviously a very pertinent and pervasive non-native EMF. We also have smart meters, which are, I think, mandatory in all new construction in the US and Australia. And they're constantly pinging a cell tower, transmitting data like thousands of times an hour, which is an absolutely unnecessary exposure. And then things like a radar gun, they're using 30 gigahertz to track your speed, which I didn't even know. But if you go back to the 90s, they found that police officers have like a way higher incidence of testicular cancer. And there's all these lawsuits, and they never heard about it ever again. The top right might be my favorite one, and perhaps the favorite one for this audience, because I think this is something that was used on Australian civilians during COVID. It's called an active denial system. So this has been in the military for 15 plus years, and they started using it in some places for crowd control, right? So I think there was, some protests going on, and people experienced the wrath of a 90 gigahertz, roughly, electromagnetic weapon that the military uses and unleashed on civilians. And you can basically move people, you can cause their skin to feel like it's burning. This is the future of military, but it's also concerningly the potential future of control for our governments on, protests and outbreaks. And anyone who's in the military sphere knows that all warfare is turning to electromagnetic. It's EMPs, it's lasers, it's things like this. It's all going to this invisible warfare that we can't really control. So again, this has been around for 15, 20 years already, and now it's just getting out there. So this is the frequency allocation chart, the radio spectrum that we have in the US. So as I mentioned earlier, and I'll just go back to this chart here. So we basically have nothing outside of the Earth's natural magnetic field, lightning, and visible light. It's like a tiny stick. Now we have the entire band is full of radio frequencies. So this is going from the kilohertz, the thousands of hertz region up to gigahertz, especially with cell phones and everything. So radios, I mean, a lot of this is isolated and cut off for military applications, for communications, for airport, telecommunications, radio, FM, AM bands. It's all part of it. So we went from having no radio frequencies to an infinite amount of exposure. And these waves are not just foreign because of their frequency, which is 100% the case. They're also highly different because they're pulsed. And pulse signals are very alien. And this is a very technical slide that I made for one of my EMF courses that I used to promote a lot. But basically, radio frequencies and as well artificial lighting are highly pulsed, and they do that for signal control, for having more bandwidth and signal modulation, and this is also a problem. And the research has shown, like from Dr. Martin Powell, that these pulsed waves, if you took the same frequency and had a continuous wave and then a pulsed wave, it has an even greater effect. So if you measure with an EMF meter, you'll see that radio frequencies are constantly going up and down, and you're constantly pinging the tower. So this is even more problematic than if we had a just continuous wave. So this is a video of a flickering phone screen that I don't think is going to work, so we'll skip that. But basically now, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We have cell phones running our lives. We have artificial lighting, TV screens. I mean, you go on a flight now, and it's like, everyone's on the TV, back of their head, there's Wi-Fi at 30,000 feet. It's insane. So what is this actually doing, right? So Professor Ollie Johansson, who famously, I was talking about with Cameron, won an award for the quack of the year. That's like how the reputation of EMFs is in the mainstream. But he was quoted as saying, our current radiation exposure is a quintillion times higher than what our bodies are programmed for. And Pikachu is not a fan. So it's not even a real number because it's inconceivable. Like, we don't even know. The actual number is infinite because we'd never be exposed to any of these frequencies before, and now all of a sudden they're everywhere. And people are just like, well, it probably has no effect. Like, not everyone's dropping dead. We're probably okay. Even though Apple has a warning label on their product that says, never hold this next to your head. Yeah, and most people don't know that because they don't promote that. And who's funding a lot of these research studies, and why this is so important? Because we're electromagnetic beings, and we're meant to be on this earth. And there's a picture of me the last time I was in Australia attempting to do a handstand. But if you think about the optimal human environment, and again, a lot of folks already touched on this today, it's just being outdoors. It's getting your feet on the earth. It is absorbing sunlight, full spectrum sunlight, and absorbing the natural EMFs in our environment. So just going to quickly go through why this is so important. Because we're electromagnetic beings, we've touched on the light story. Light is how our body tells time. Sunlight is an electromagnetic input signal. We run on biological clocks. If you distort that input signal, you distort it with artificial light, we're going to have chaos because our body is going to be running off different times in different areas and not optimized for our environment. Also, the ones that I really like to tell people to convince them, it's like, well, electromagnetism doesn't matter. How do you measure brain activity? An electroencephalogram. Our brain waves are in the low frequency range. Actually, alpha brain waves, which is kind of like a light, relaxing brain state, it's the one you want to be in when you just want to relax and chill, is around 7 to 12 hertz. The Schumann's resonance, natural frequencies of the earth, are in the same range. That's not a coincidence. And you can go up and down to 1 to 2 hertz for delta waves and up to 12 to 30 hertz for beta waves. And it's showing that we are electromagnetic beings. The heart, We use an electrocardiogram to measure heart activity. There's electrical potential every time your heart is beating. The ventricles are depolarizing, they're polarizing. It's electrical potential, it's voltage. That is how we are alive. And this is a more esoteric picture because there are no good images of this, but our heart actually emanates a magnetic field because of the moving charges in it, feet outward from our body. And you can measure this with pretty expensive, magnetic field reading equipment called a squid, which I want to buy at some point. But it's cool because it means that your environment and the people you directly interact with, you are directly interacting with their field or their aura, right? Like this is where science meets woo-woo really quickly, but it's factual. And it's factual that moving charges and electrical potentials are generating these fields. We cannot see them, but we can feel them and perceive them. It's very weak. You will never be able to measure this unless you're in a Faraday cage, but it is there, it's been recorded, and it's really undeniable. Another imaging or measuring of our body's health and activities, purely electromagnetic, is the MRI, a magnetic resonance imaging machine. It uses a very strong magnetic field to actually align the spins of protons in the water molecules of the organ that we're trying to measure, and then it blasts it with a radio frequency, and the protons, how they're aligned, then resonate at that specific frequency, and that gets pulsated back and is what's measured. So, I mean, what else do you need to know that our whole entire body is being affected by electromagnetic inputs? They're literally using this to measure images of our biology. But if you stand next to a power line that also emanates a strong magnetic field, there's no way it could have any impact on our health. And then grounding, earthing. I mean, this one's I feel like I don't even need to tell anyone. Everyone already knows this, but grounding and earthing has basically gone mainstream because it's, I think, just fun for people to walk around barefoot and kind of stick it to, Nike and the man by walking, connecting to the earth. But it's really crazy. Literally walking barefoot on the earth, you get to absorb free electrons because it's negative surface charge from all those lightning strikes. Remember I was talking about lightning? And stronger at the equatorial regions, and then that improves blood flow. It's probably the best antioxidant that you could consume. The sweat glands on your feet and your hands are naturally more active, so that it improves the conductivity so that you can absorb these free electrons more, and that is an input signal that is also going to strengthen the relationship with the natural magnetic field and electric field of the earth. So grounding has been shown to improve cortisol rhythms and your circadian rhythm. It improves blood flow because blood is naturally, red blood cells are using negative charges to separate and to flow smoothly. The entire cardiovascular system, which if you weren't in Melbourne, Max did a brilliant talk on the difference in potential and the importance of biological water, how that plays into cardiovascular health, and how also sunlight plays into that role by affecting that biological water. So it's another example of electromagnetic beings. Voltage-gated ion channels are another one. They literally have a voltage sensor so that things like potassium, calcium, sodium can go in and out of the cell. I won't dive too deep. Mitochondria, that's a word that I'm glad people have already brought up. I didn't really know how deep to go on this, but the mitochondria, the most important aspect of our biology, in my opinion, they are literally creating a voltage gradient from protons. So proticity, not electrical current. The flow of electrons is electricity, and in our mitochondria, we actually have a flow of protons and a proton gradient. But about 150 millivolts across our mitochondria, about 1,000 mitochondria roughly in each cell. It depends on the type of cell, more in the heart, more in the brain, more in the eyes. We have 30 trillion cells in our body. You take that, it's 4.5 times 10 to the 15 volts collectively. And that's where people like Doug Wallace, who's a mitochondrial researcher and expert, say this is the difference between being dead and being alive, is the electrical potential in our bodies. And the mitochondria are vastly important. They sense the electromagnetic inputs in our environment. They produce energy which you could debate what exactly that is. They produce ATP and they produce biological water. Both could be said to be sources of energy. They're a communication hub for our immune system and a whole lot more. So I mentioned the magnetic field being vastly important as well to our biology. We actually can sense it. So I know every man in this room has a good sense of direction, even if they get lost sometimes and need to ask for help. But we actually have magnetic crystals in our brain to sense the magnetic field of the Earth. And this has been proven. 1992, this was proven that 5 and 100 million crystals per gram of magnetite, which is magnetically sensitive crystals, are in our brain. And, you think of ancestral times where people had to navigate. You think of other biological creatures, such as birds that are constantly transversing or migrating, whales, everything. How did they know where they're going? There's no GPS, there's no Google Maps, We can't go anywhere without, Google Maps. I mean, we're so beholden to our devices that we've lost this touch completely. And there's been some new research coming out that has proven this as well. So now I want to kind of get to the biological effects. Like, how bad is this stuff, Do I have to throw my phone out in the bin? Do I have to just move to the woods? What's going on? Like, how bad is this? So biological effects, artificial blue light, it's already been covered. Broken clocks, this is a big problem, leads to a lot of downstream issues. Blue light is the most dominant sight gaber to our body. So it's one that's setting the rhythm the strongest. Blue light suppresses melatonin more than longer wavelengths. I think this has been covered enough. Radio frequencies, extremely low frequencies, are classified as possibly carcinogenic. There is research showing that chronic exposure, and emphasis on the chronic, has been linked to show the increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases, reproductive issues, cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, headaches, migraine. I mean, you literally go down the list. Anything that exists, it's been linked to. And here I have a lovely image of a study about a guy on his cell phone and how that's affecting his fertility, his sperm quality, and it's something that we're seeing, right? Infertility is just through the roof. Now, both male and female. I mean, typically it's blamed on the female when probably the guy has his cell phone in his pocket all day long, is eating like shit, doesn't consume enough, high quality nutrition and saturated fats, as Kira mentioned in her talk, and no one's considering this. And actually, if you go to really good fertility clinics, they will bring this up. They're like the only people that acknowledge that. And yeah, I mean, not to call people out, raise your hand if your phone is in your pocket right now, like turned on. Probably a good amount, right? Because we don't even think about it. Like, nobody is telling us that this is like bad potentially for our fertility, let alone our health. And I'm going to get into what you can do about it, what matters in terms of what to be aware of. So I'm going to scare you, and then I'm going to tell you that it's okay. Like, it's going to be okay. So basically, everyone wants to see the studies. Now, I could handpick research. I can do this. I can say, it causes cancer. There's some crazy studies going back to the 60s. I mean, in the 70s, this was like a public health, public issue. You can go watch a 60-minute documentary on Project Sanguine in the US, which basically they put up this giant antenna, the Navy was trying to, and then these doctors testified against it, and it was like this whole ordeal. So in the 70s, in the USSR, the Soviet Union was big on EMFs, and that was like big in the US media, and then they swept it all under the rug, and then nobody worried about it, and then all of a sudden, the dot-com bubble happens, the tech boom happens, and we all just have these devices everywhere before any research is done, any safety. The FCC, which governs radio frequency policy in the US, hasn't updated their guidelines on safe limits and thresholds since 1996, which is the year I was born, which is before the Wi-Fi router came out. So yeah, pretty crazy, but people want to see research. So my favorite person to point to is this guy named Dr. Henry Lai. He's just this professor who had no agenda at University of Washington, and he just started stumbling across a bunch of evidence. He just started realizing, wow, there's a lot of research out there on the negative effects of EMFs on our health. So he put together 2,500 plus studies in regards to non-native electromagnetic exposures, and he found that roughly like 80 to 90% of them showed harmful effects. So like you literally can't argue against such a vast body of research. And guess what else he found? He found that when industry funded the studies, they actually only showed biological effects like 30 to 40% of the time. So there's meddling going on, of course. And, I'm not going to read this whole list, but you can go down from radio frequency exposure to power frequency exposure, and it's the same thing. And they're always reporting on like oxidative stress and infertility and neuropsychiatric conditions. But one that I want to point out is at the top here, the 96% of 92 studies in the radio frequency exposure group had a specific absorption rate of less than 0.4 watts per kilogram. That might not mean anything to anyone who's not looked into this, but basically they measure radiation exposure from your cell phones with a metric called specific absorption rate. So they measure how much is the radiation is being absorbed into the tissue to your head, and then they do some on the torso as well. And this is like how they classify cell phones as safe. And this is it's below. It's like a third of what the actual threshold is. And 96% of these studies are showing effects below that threshold, significantly below that threshold. And you can get into this history. There was a doctor in France who actually revealed that 90% of smartphones on the market were higher radiation than their metric. And then if you really want to get pissed off, you can go look up how they do the testing. And they do it on a 6'2", 220 pound, I don't know what that is in kilograms, but large adult male. Imagine the testing is being done on Simon and the same thresholds are being used for your 4-year-old or your 8-year-old, or anyone else, or a female, half the size. So that's a problem, right? How is that allowed? So here, just getting into more specific reasons, I'll probably skim over this, but why are these so bad for our health or our biology? They're stressors at a high level, and this is kind of what's been communicated for decades. They activate, cell danger response receptors. They activate voltage-gated ion channels. They weaken the blood-brain barrier. They disrupt our microbiome. All these things, for me, point towards dysfunctional mitochondria. And as mentioned, I think it's the most important aspect of our biology, being the electromagnetic sensors, being the energy inputs, the communication hub. And this is why I think this was already mentioned by Cameron. So we really need to get more diverse speakers here, Max. We're all just saying the same things. But mitochondrial dysfunction plays a central role in aging and pretty much is related to all forms of chronic disease. And it's true. And if we compromise our electromagnetic environment, we're going to end up with dysfunctional mitochondria. We're not going to be able to have the energy, have the electrical potential and output to handle the stressors and handle the demands of our life. The ones I like to talk about, which is less biochemical and biological, is more so just like engineering and common sense. So these are words that seem to be like pretty popular, especially in the crunchy world of vibration and frequency and resonance. So, what's the vibe, man? Like, what does that even mean? I'm not resonating with that message. These are words that are thrown around, and actually, most people don't understand what that means. And this is all cool to me because I used to work in electronics where we would actually measure what's called EMI, which is electromagnetic interference. And this for me is the easiest way to explain why these things are harmful. So we have input signals that we want. We want sunlight. We want the Earth's natural magnetic and electric field. But we have all this other crap. We have radio frequencies, we have power frequencies, and they're causing incoherence. They are disrupting our biological input signals that we need. And then they're also disrupting or causing some resonance to happen in our biology that's very unnatural. So you can see the examples. And one thing that has kind of been thrown around is this resonant antenna effect. And back when like FM radio was really popular, that's around 100 megahertz, it's actually, the whole resonant antenna theory is basically the length of the wavelength and the length of the antenna has to be in the same ballpark. So that's why the higher the frequency they go, the smaller the antenna. So really old school 2G, 3G cell towers, they have way bigger antennas because they're lower frequency. 5G towers have these small little rectangular antennas now that you see, and there's multiple. There's like 12 of them on one tower. That's because they've raised the frequency. And the FM radio band happened to align at a wavelength of around, the frequency is 100 megahertz, the wavelength's around 6 feet, so the size of a human body. And they actually did research that showed there was a stronger biological effect. So they moved the threshold just for FM radio down like 3x. And that was what they did. So that was a while ago. No one really operates on FM radio too much anymore, but we can use that as an example. And the way I like to talk about it is, I'm talking in this room right now. Nobody else is talking. You can hear me very clearly, right? If everyone started talking right now, kind of like when Max is trying to round everyone up, he's literally got to tell 5 people to start whistling. You can't hear as well. The main signal gets diluted because there's so much noise on the line. And that's what's happening in our biology, right? We have the input signals that we need to receive from our environment, but there's so much noise in the room from 5G, from Wi-Fi, from that cell tower down the road, from some power supply, from your fridge, from the electrical power in the walls. So that's diluting the signal completely, and then we get something that is not optimal. And when our body is not communicating properly, we have biological chaos. You don't receive the instructions. It's like if you have 25 people in a line of communication, by the time the message gets to the last person, it's like in Japanese and it started in English. And what happens? We have inflammation, we have the wrong input signals, and we have all of this chronic fatigue, which is ultimately leading to chronic disease over time, over chronic exposure. And there's some cool kind of stuff coming out in the research that's showing the resonance of cells. We don't even understand really how biology is functioning at these levels. But a cool example here is the ATP synthase, which is this nanomotor in our mitochondria, which is pumping out protons. It's using the proton voltage to create ATP. Like, this is literally in our body. I mean, we have nanomotors in our body. It's amazing, right? Like, it's truly an act of God. And we have thousands of these, but up to thousands of these in each mitochondria. And I think I already gave you the number of how many mitochondria there are in each cell and in our body total. And it's incredible. And this generates a magnetic field because it's rotating at up to 7,000 rotations per minute. So you can imagine when you have all these unnatural fields, that's going to be causing some disruption, and that magnetic field is attracting things such as oxygen to the end of the electron transport chain to be that final electron acceptor. So combine that distortion with, say, things like no grounding that's blocking our blood flow because we don't have the proper negative charge, and you're getting hypoxia for no reason. So that's leading to a lot of biological issues. And then we have water. Water is so fascinating, and it's up there. It might be one of the most important, if not the most important aspect of our biology. It's the one that is the most under-discussed. It's kind of just like, what do we need to know about water? It's just there around the cell, but in reality, it's so much more. It actually has the potential, literally, to have electrical potential and be a battery. And Gerald Pollack's work has defined this through the exclusion zone and can be charged through sunlight and proper electron flow in our body. And then we also have coherent domains within our water. Basically, water is acting as an antenna. It absorbs the electromagnetic information in our environment. So the information that you give it is going to be the outcome that, the water has. So if it's absorbing a bunch of radio frequencies instead of natural frequencies, that's going to be problematic. And there's all these things, that will happen from non-native EMF exposure, such as disrupting the network of hydrogen bonds and coherence and the exclusion zone, and decreasing the voltage of the water battery, and that's leading to impaired communication and energy production and mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's another component of our biology that's highly dependent on electromagnetic inputs. And just to summarize, this is a lot of information. Light is information, and light is really what's driving our biology. And if we give these incorrect input signals, we are going to have suboptimal outputs. And that's what it comes down to. So native electromagnetic fields, sunlight, seasonal food, temperature, oxygen, water, bacteria, these are the input signals that we want if we want optimal outputs. It's a system, right? I'm an engineer, so this is how I think about it. And it's that simple. Optimize the inputs and you will optimize the outputs. So I know way over time here. So this generation smoking is what I think about our devices. And it's a problem because children especially are far more vulnerable. They have smaller body sizes. They have higher biological water content. Their eyes let through more blue light. They're more sensitive to melatonin disruption. And they're on our device. They're on devices younger and younger and younger. And we have no alternative. So the basic TLDR for mitigating EMF exposure is elimination of the source, duration of exposure, distance is your best friend. You can work in shielding. But basically, if you don't need something, unplug it. Turn off your phone or turn on airplane mode. Don't carry it on your body because the intensity of the field goes down by a squared factor when you put more distance in between it. So use speakerphone, use wired headphones, and then the duration. Most biological effects in these studies are shown after 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours plus. So if you can minimize that duration of exposure, you'll minimize the harmful effects. So turn your Wi-Fi off at night. I turn the power to my bedroom off at night because I have a separate circuit breaker. I don't keep my phone or anything plugged on in my bedroom because the sleep is really important. That's when you're restoring and repairing the day's damage. So if there's one thing, if you can't control your day-to-day, you have a 9 to 5, you can't get outside, need to be on the phone, that's fine. Prioritize your sleep. Prioritize your bedroom and really allow your body to restore and repair from the day's damage. That is my biggest tip. We can't avoid this, right? Like it's everywhere. Fear-mongering is not the answer. But if you literally use your cell phone smarter by using speaker, airplane mode, you turn your Wi-Fi and things off at nighttime and don't hold your phone next to your head, you'll probably reduce your EMF exposure by 95+%. And that's a win. And then proliferating that message to your children and how they use devices and how they use screens is really, really important. So here's some memes. Better Call Saul. This guy was onto something, but the way you react to these toxins and stressors is going to determine their effects. So if you're constantly neurotic about EMFs and cell towers, I get all these questions. There's a cell tower like 600 meters from my house. It's like, all right, like, is your phone on in your pocket like right now? Because that's probably more important. And the government is like not blasting 5G into your window because like they're worried about you. So yeah, use your speakerphone in public. Be that guy. It's better. And then just quickly, I'm happy to talk more about this afterwards, but my full-time job now is I work for the Daylight Computer Company. We are the first company in the world that's building like healthier technology, healthier computers. That's our mission. Someone's got to do it. Apple doesn't give a fuck about us. Neither does Google. Neither does Samsung. They're never going to innovate. They're not going to. There's no incentive. Apple sells 75 million iPads a year. They're a $3 trillion company. So my founder's been working on this for 6 years. I dropped everything I was doing to jump on board. It's been amazing. We just launched end of May. But basically, we have a new screen technology that's blue light free. It's reflective, so you can use it outside. It's low stimulation. It's not very dopaminergic. It's not going to suck you in like a Las Vegas casino type screen. You can use it outside, so you can touch grass and be productive. And yeah, it's flicker free. We have a custom amber backlight that has no blue light, so you compare it to an iPad Spectra. And yeah, it's alien versus more like a candle, as you can see on the left from some spectrometer readings. And we're just getting started. We're basically trying to take all the reasons why technology is bad for our health and address them. So that's our mission. You can check us out at daylightcomputer.com. Don't forget, nature is the real world. All the input signals you need are coming from the earth and coming from the outdoors. It's where our biology is designed to thrive. So go outside. Thank you.